So, a lot of major art institutions are still figuring out how to reflect the importance of hip hop in culture. The Art Gallery of Ontario just launched this big new exhibit about hip hop, and it lets us ask some really important questions. Today, how hip hop is valued in major art institutions. I'm Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. Look, I want to tell you about this new exhibit at the Art Gallery of Ontario. It is an exhibit that has a lot of hip-hop fans talking. It is called The Culture, Hip-Hop, and Contemporary Art in the 21st Century, and it's the AGO's first international hip-hop exhibit ever. This exhibit is open now. It's open until April 6th. Mark Campbell is a Canadian hip-hop academic based in Toronto. Aaron Francis is an MC, an art curator based in Kitchener. They've both seen the exhibit. They're both with me now. Aaron, Mark, welcome to the show, y'all. How's it going?
That's good.
What up, what up?
Thanks
Hello.
for having me.
Listen, I'm delighted that you're here. Mark, I'm going to start with you, man. What should people know about this exhibit before even checking it out?
What people should know about the exhibit is that it's following a long line, right? The precedent has been set. This is not something new for major art museums, right, or art institutions. You know, back in 2000, the Brooklyn Museum had, a show, Hip Hop Nation, Roots, Rhymes, and Rage. And it was, that's 25 years ago. So it's a quarter century. Major, art museums have been doing that. And it's not just the United States, right? So you can go to Paris. I went to a great show in Paris at the Philharmonie. You could go the Smithsonian in the U.S. There are places all over the world that are having these conversations inside art institutions.
I think what we're adjusting to is that our major art institutions are still figuring out how to do that. And by our, I mean in this country. And let's get into it. But before we do, Aaron, listen, you got on the you got on the 401. You came down from Kitchener to Toronto to check out the exhibit. What'd you love about it?
I love the interdisciplinary nature of it. I thought it was a great mix from mixed media to portraiture. I was so happy to see like a Deanna Lawson piece and, be on the 5th floor and hearing like in the background, hearing that DJ mix. Shout out to whoever put that mix together. I thought it was a dope mix. I'm hearing all kinds of Canadian hip hop and being in the AGO gift shop and seeing like Lord Finesse records in the gift shop. I thought to me it was a bit of a coup. I liked it.
Mark, let me ask you, what about you? What was your favorite part of the exhibit?
My favorite part was it was called Plantano Pride, and it was this piece by Miguel Luciano, and it was really about it was a plantain that was encased in platinum and silver, and it was a huge necklace. And what I loved about it is not, these pieces are in conversation. I love to watch how the audience is engaged, and kids would run over and go, "Oh, look, a banana," and the parents would come over, and like a lot of people in Toronto don't. Not a lot of people. Some people in Toronto don't know what a plantain is. Not a plantain, a plantain. You know, and what I love about it is that piece talks about anti-Black sentiments in Puerto Rico, and people don't usually connect hip hop outside of mainland America and the way in which sort of it was a classist sentiment to say you have the brown stain of the plantain on your hand and you're from the lower class and and you're so it was an anti-Black sentiment that was recuperated. And I love to see it in the exhibition because it challenges the audience to think more widely about hip hop, race, class, and think about hip hop outside of the physical continental U.S.
I think that's the thing that you want out of an exhibit like this, is to say you've been thinking about hip hop in this kind of way, and let's just slightly shift the way that you've been carrying it around with you. One of the Canadian elements of that exhibit revolve around the clothing line, specifically Two Black Guys, which was founded by the designer Adrian Aitchison. Can you please give us a sense of the importance of Two Black Guys? Yeah. Why is Two Black Guys important?
Well, Two Black Guys, first of all, Two Black Guys needed to have more space in that exhibition. Groundbreaking 1990s clothing company, Two Black Guys. Adrian founds it with 2 other co-founders, and shout out to them. They were within this ecosystem and this era of the emergence of urban streetwear. Right, so we have Cross Colors, we have Carl Kanai, we have all these things happening from 1989 in New York. Toronto is right there, right? Mary J. Blige rocks that jersey in her breakout single, Real Love. Quentin Tarantino is also rocking that. Two Black Guys is a major statement that Toronto is not just following, but we're in the midst of it, right? So that urban streetwear moment with Carl Kanai, Cross Colors, Two Black Guys, 100 Miles, shout out to them. That paves the way for Virgil Abloh walking in to disrupt the entire fashion industry just a couple of years ago. You know, rest in peace, Virgil.
Yeah, of course.
But that moment, you know, Toronto's there, and there's no denying, you know, and it wasn't one of these marketing ploys. Mary J's stylist goes into a shop in New York and sees this shirt in a 555 Soul store, buys the shirt and dresses her for the video. So there's Toronto cemented in history.
I'm glad you connected it all the way to like the idea of Virgil Abloh. Like you don't get, you know, Off-White and the dominance that it had, and then Virgil's place in fashion without sort of starting in places exactly like this. Aaron, the Two Black Guys brand was a big deal for you also growing up, but also, speaking of clothing here, it is worth mentioning, pal, that your mom actually ran one of the first black clothing stores in Kitchener too. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
For sure, just briefly. I mean, the first Black-owned clothing boutique in Kitchener-Waterloo was started by my mom, Angela. Shout out my mom. So yeah, I was at the front lines as a youth, watching Two Black Guys and all its elusiveness. You know, you couldn't really acquire it unless you were at the Toronto store, speaking as an Ontarian. But, you know, my mom was bringing in pieces from Montreal, from New York, from Jamaica, and salute. I've always had the highest respect for Two Black Guys brand.
I want to make room for some of the tension that we talked about earlier. This idea that, like, yes, maybe major art institutions have been doing this for a minute, but not necessarily ours in this country. Mark, listen, the debut of this exhibit sort of ends up sparking this criticism of the AGO's track record when it comes to making space for contemporary art that actually intersects with hip hop. What's the best version of that criticism, do you think?
The best version, I mean, the context is this is a traveling exhibition, right? This is the Baltimore Museum of Art partnering with the St. Louis Art Museum, bringing a show, their 50th anniversary show, to Toronto. That was 2 years ago. So in a sense, the best way to, you know, the let's say the kindest kind of criticism is that we get the leftovers from America's celebration of hip hop's 50th, and it's sprinkled and decorated with 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 local Toronto artists. But that's not the whole story, right? The Art Gallery of Ontario is a Crown corporation. It represents the entire province of Ontario. So, you know, shout out to Ottawa. The Ottawa Art Gallery did 83 Till Infinity during hip hop's 50th year. They did a whole show just on the history of hip hop in Ottawa. You know, so you have artists from those cities that there's pieces that the AGO could have borrowed and actually represented Ontario a little bit stronger in it. But most importantly, I think the most important criticism is that it really continues this kind of U.S. media imperialism, right? So like you have a touring show, it comes outside of the country, and then the local Toronto artists end up being on the peripheral of the show, right? So shout out Patrick Nichols. We have the Great Day of Toronto photo, but, you know, look beyond that, you know, look how many pieces there are. And then you have us sort of saying, yeah, well, we're also here too. No, we're right in the middle of this, right? There are so many acts that don't become international acts if they don't come on stage at Concert Hall when Ron Nelson's putting on these events. That's when Biz Markie, LL Cool J, Rakim, Queen Latifah realize, oh, I'm an artist. I'm an international artist. This is when they get passports. You know what I'm saying? So Toronto is central to hip hop's global presence, and the fact that, you know, we have to sort of beg and be on the margins and sort of be an afterthought. I mean, the real question is why isn't there a hip hop 50th show in Toronto?
I mean, I want to be absolutely clear about, you know, your criticism here. The criticism isn't that, hey, I'm glad you're doing this, but also why are you doing this as an add-on to a traveling show that comes from the U.S.? And it feels like the Canadian elements of it are maybe, afterthought is not the right word, but sort of attached on to the sort of American centrality of the exhibit, as opposed to from the ground up sort of building something that is a kind of rooted here. Is that the criticism that I'm hearing?
Definitely, because there's precedent. You know, the Vancouver Art Gallery, you know, back in 2008, you know, they have Beat Nation, they have an entire exhibition on contemporary art and Indigenous culture and hip hop. It travels across the country. It arrives at the power plant in 2012. Like, that's more than a decade ago. So it's not like there's not artists and there's not work and there's not other institutions that could either, you know, help the AGO borrow materials or find people. You know, I recently helped the museum in Winnipeg, the Human Rights Museum, do a show on popular music. And, you know, and they had to source materials. And we were calling, you know, Wes out in Maestro Fresh West out in Newfoundland, and I'm calling people in Montreal. So it's not like it's impossible. It just seems like the effort was, oh, let's just, this thing is touring. Let's bring it here, and we can't do it because we're not on an equal footing. There's tons of precedent for it. So it's kind of mind-boggling that, 2 years after hip hop's 50th, we're getting a show that has very little connection to the place that it's going to.
And Aaron, what's wild about this is that we are getting that show in Toronto, which sort of talks about itself as the center of hip hop in this country, and then you get Mark sort of naming Vancouver doing things, New Brunswick doing things, Ottawa doing things, places that are sort of outside of the centrality of Toronto. You are based in Kitchener. You are an MC and an art curator. When you think about the centrality of how we talk about how important Toronto is to hip hop, do you find that we tend to sort of center Toronto too much and maybe not focus on the rest of the regions and their contributions to hip hop?
I mean, that's not an unfair statement. Definitely, there's no blueprint for how does an artist outside of the city of Toronto find themselves gaining attention in the Toronto art market. I think of artists from Kitchener such as Patricia Simone or Alana Decker. These are dope artists that have shown in every major institution in KW several times over, but then how do they make the leap to the AGO? Even in my own experience with Vintage Black Canada, my archive, I've done really well for myself, but it wouldn't be without the patronage. The first came from Band Gallery Toronto that I was able to myself show in the AGO a couple of times.
I want to be careful about how I talk about this because I think it's important to sort of get this right. Art institutions are sort of figuring out their place in the moment, which is to say, how do you speak to the most contemporary culture that is right in front of you? Alex Sarian, who runs an art organization in Calgary, wrote this great book called The Audacity of Relevance, which is to say, if you run a large art institution and you're saying, we are the curators of great art, come to us and we'll tell you what great art is. Whatever you're engaging with out there, that does not count as sort of an elevated art. But then you end up with these institutions sort of ossifying because they're not speaking directly to what people are actually engaging with. But then you get these moments, Mark. You get these moments where the AGO says, you know what? No, it's time for us to sort of get a little bit closer to what people are engaging with. And then they put on this exhibit. So what are you hoping the AGO exhibit sort of signals to the art world across Canada about hip hop's place in contemporary art and contemporary culture?
The most optimistic view I can give is really, teaching the world that hip hop has an aesthetic legacy, and that hip hop is more than just rappers on television, and that it's a multidisciplinary art form that has captured the world's attention, right? So you can go anywhere in the world. You can go to Mongolia and find hip hop, not just rappers. So there's an aesthetic there. There's an aesthetic that informs how contemporary artists make work. There's an aesthetic, especially when you look at some of these pieces. Deanna Lawson's piece is absolutely amazing. It is about speaking truth to power. It is about the hip hop aesthetic is about finding by any means possible. It is about hustle. It is about being fresh. It is about inventing value when people tell you that you're not valuable. That's the core of hip hop. You could be valuable as soon as you do that windmill on that cardboard, or if you turn your hat backwards, and there's no institution that could control the creation of that value. And this is why it's gone global. And if an art museum wants to figure out how to have a show, like I had a show with the McMichael Canadian Art Collection in 2018, and they wouldn't let us spray on the walls. Right, but they would take the show because the head curator wanted it. Audiences will learn that this is something that young people that are devalued by their society, racialized brown and black young people, have created a global value of young people and style and being fresh. So it's it's the language, it's the clothing, and hopefully people that go to the show at the AGO will walk away thinking, wow, I didn't realize hip hop was all of that. And it's still, in 52 years later, it's still, disrupting the dominant narratives and the dominant regimes of truth and teaching people how to create value.
I'm going to take those words, I'm going to hold on to them, the idea of an aesthetic legacy, because we are all sort of curators of that hip-hop aesthetic legacy, and we get to be a part of it, and we're lucky to do so. So I got to leave it there. Aaron and Mark, I really appreciate your time. This has been a delight. Thanks again.
Thanks again.
Yes, of course.
Peace, Aaron.
Thank you.
Yeah, man.
Mark Campbell is the founder of the Northside Hip Hop Archives and an associate professor of music and culture at the University of Toronto in Scarborough, where he's based in Toronto. And Aaron Francis is an MC, art curator, and academic based in Kitchener, Ontario. The Culture, Hip Hop and Contemporary Art in the 21st Century at the Art Gallery of Ontario is open until April 6th. I'm Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. Look, I think one challenge of following the wildfires in Los Angeles is that we keep hearing the names of very famous people who have lost their homes. Like, just to name a few: Paris Hilton, Mel Gibson, Eugene Levy, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Billy Crystal, Bella Hadid. That's a lot of names. But the thing is, celebrities end up taking up a lot of headline space. You end up hearing a lot more about the rich and famous people who are suffering. And not to undermine their suffering, that is of course real, but the reality of Los Angeles and what has been lost is very different. Kathryn Borel is back with us from LA. Kathryn, welcome back to the show, friend.
Hi, Elamin.
Hi. Look, it's hard to describe, I think, the scale of all the destruction around you. You know, more than 12,000 homes and other structures have burned in the past week or so. More than 100,000 people evacuated. 25 people have died. Let me just start with you. Like, how are you doing? Because like that is an overwhelming amount of just chaos around you.
I am physically fine. I'm really lucky to be in this sort of odd sweet spot that's equidistant between the Palisades fire, which is burning to the west, and then the Eaton fire, which is burning to the east. And right now the winds are blowing to the north, so that could change at any moment. We're in a high wind warning until I think noon tomorrow, so you know the go bag is packed. But it's just like you said, you know, how do you not get kind of like nauseous and dizzy from all of the loss? And I think before this week, I think I knew one person in my life who had lost their house in a house fire. And now I personally know 25 people who have lost their homes,
wow.
You know, like this is touching everyone. And there's also these eerie moments where you can kind of trick yourself, you know, like again, because I'm sort of wind lucky at the moment, you can trick yourself into not seeing it. And then you go outside and a car drives by that's covered in ash, or you crest a hill and there's this sort of pinky gray mushroom cloud coming from the west. And then you're like, oh, right, I'm in it, you know, I'm not in it, but I'm very close to it, and it snaps you out of the delusion. So there's an abstraction there, but it's also very real. Yeah, so it's sort of brain boggling.
I appreciate you sort of stepping out of the abstraction to be in the emotions and in the feelings of the idea of like, you know, like knowing 25 people who've had their homes burned down. Like that's an overwhelming week, that's an overwhelming time. So thank you for doing this. I guess I wanted to talk about like the way that we pay attention to celebrities in these moments, because like it's like, you know, we pay attention to whether, you know, what they vote for, the shampoo they're using. Like we are used to that, and it makes some sense. I think that outsized coverage about the fires has been on celebrities because we're so used to just being like, this famous person is already known to people. It becomes a story. But you also work in Hollywood. So what strikes you about the way this tragedy is kind of maybe being filtered through the lens of focusing so much on celebrities?
Well, you know, you're sort of pointing to the idea of this attention economy, right? That is around the celebrities, but there's also just a straight up economy as well, right? You know, but there's a celebrity industrial complex and an unbelievable amount of money and organization and manpower goes into that, you know, via PR teams and marketing. And so that doesn't disappear when a tragedy of this magnitude suddenly happens. You know, I assume it goes into kind of a twisted overdrive because, you know, these people are figureheads. They know that they are figureheads, and they and their teams likely have to make all kinds of decisions in terms of, you know, how to be like, whether they're going to be public facing about this, like what GoFundMes they're going to amplify, or whether or not they're going to be privately facing about this, you know, what to say and when to say it and how to say it and on what platform. And then you add to that, you know, the way that news is disseminated now and amplified, which for the most part, you know, especially with the celebrity culture, is via algorithms, right? So it's completely unsurprising that we're seeing stories about Paris Hilton and Mel Gibson clogging our feeds rather than stories about, you know, the things that are actually happening that matter, you know, which is like, there are currently 900 California prisoners fighting the fires for slave wages right now. You know, there's how these fires are going to make it even harder for all the working class people who sustain the entertainment industry to, so they can continue to exist and pay bills throughout this catastrophe. Like, especially on the heels of the work standstills from 2023, which is when you and I first talked.
Yeah.
And so there's just so many other stories that are both like heartbreaking, exploitative, heartwarming, and it's easy to say, like, who cares about Miley Cyrus's house? But for every Miley Cyrus, there are thousands of people who aren't Miley Cyrus and who have to move through this disaster without a Miley Cyrus level safety net or any safety net at all. And so I think it's just really important to know. And then it's also just important to be like, tune into the PBS NewsHour, instead of like your Instagram feed and see what they are saying, because that's not algorithm based. So yeah.
I want to draw on something important that you highlighted, which is the idea that, like, I think I've seen a few interviews of inmates fighting these fires and sort of giving some interviews. The wages in California that California pays those inmates is a daily wage between $5.80 and $10.24. So just to put that context, so like the idea of that being your daily wage to be involved in this fire, which is to say, that's the part of this conversation I'm trying to get to, is that I feel like the focus on celebrities and the focus on these faces, the idea that Bella Hadid becomes how you understand what is happening in California, it obscures other dynamics. It obscures other, I think, more fundamental ways of understanding the story. What do you think we're missing when we sort of, what does the focus on celebrities so much get in the way of us understanding?
Short answer is everything. I think, like that's a really existential question.
Yeah, sure.
I think absolutely everything that matters. No, but I mean, if I'm to zoom all the way out, like to an outer space perspective on this, I think what we're missing is that the way that we consume media about tragedy and devastation does not connect to the humanity that inevitably arises out of these extreme moments, which is what I am seeing, as a person who is here. Like the fact that everyone I know who still has a house is donating, cooking, sweeping where they can, making a Google document of underfunded GoFundMes, and what this tells me is that the way that we consume media about tragedies is a really great way to kill off hope. Because when you go into those cycles and when you kill off hope, you've got a great incentive to stay on your phone and in your house and keep scrolling, because what is the point? But there is a point, and it's actually really easy to find if you leave your house, and go and participate in small acts of community care, like whatever you can do. But that requires going outside and being bold enough to do a small act of community care. And then I just want to highlight like this one thing that I just can't stop thinking about. Like LA is this gigantic, improbable, poorly managed city that probably shouldn't exist to a certain extent, but like the community that the Eaton fire burned leveled to the ground, like that's a historically Black neighborhood in Los Angeles. It was one of the few places in Los Angeles County where people of color were able to buy homes in the 1960s. Jackie Robinson lived there. Like the science fiction author Octavia Butler is buried there. Like the leader of the Black Panther Party, Eldridge Cleaver, was from there. And, Altadena is this American success story, and now it's gone. And that's important to remember. It was also a great place to bike. I used to cycle there, during the pandemic. It's how I kept myself safe. There's wild peacocks in that area. There's a great vegan Thai place that I go to. And now that's gone. And, losing an entire town is completely inconceivable. So I think it's just, important to remember that. That's what was lost. That's what's been lost as well.
Yeah, to just zoom out of all the headlines you're seeing about this celebrity lost a mansion that is this price, and say, no, there's real community that is affected, and there's real community that is behaving in different ways because of these fires. What you said also reminded me of my favorite author is Rebecca Solnit, and Rebecca Solnit wrote this incredible book called Paradise Built in Hell, and it's entirely this book that is about how all the coverage of natural disasters tells us that these are the moments that people turn on each other, and you need police presence in order to enforce the chaos that's going to ensue. But Paradise Built in Hell is sort of like Rebecca's only making this argument that like you will never see people leaning towards each other and reaching towards each other more than in these moments of crisis. And it sounds like that is what you're seeing, Kathryn.
100%. Like, I just got goosebumps because it's like that. You nailed it. That's exactly it. I mean, I do this mutual aid effort in MacArthur Park, which is a park in downtown Los Angeles. We've been doing it since the pandemic, and we cook 400 park lunches for people, for the unhoused people in that park every Sunday. And we have this motto, which is not just once but many times, and because that's how you actually make change. And it's like the level of not just once but many times I am seeing every single day since this thing has happened, and that I have no doubt will continue. It's
That's
like
really
this
beautiful.
this stupid town is a town of like dreamers, and it's also a town that is filled with people who know how to do production. And yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I was like, we're about to run out of the bottom of the clock. But also, I just really appreciate that perspective. Kathryn, this has been tremendous. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it, friend.
You're welcome. Thanks.
As of course, Kathryn Borel is a Canadian screenwriter. She's in LA. My name is Elamin. This is Commotion. See you tomorrow.